Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Let the filibustering begin.
Welcome to Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to Filibuster here on the Nerd Party Network. I'm your host, Lee Hutchison, and joining me today in the guest chair is Dallas King. Dallas, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
On a recent Ask Me Anything, we spoke about how all the way back in episode 69, the original aim for Dallas was for him to be a guest on this podcast to discuss his non-fiction travel book, Exterior, New York City, Discover the Real New York on Location. We decided that we're going to revisit that original concept and put Dallas in the guest chair as opposed to the co-host chair for today. So we're going to treat Dallas like we would any of our many guests that we've had on this show today. So Dallas, are you looking forward to trading places?
I feel like I'm on Mastermind or something. There's a lot more pressure suddenly. I'm in the black chair, the lights are down.
Yeah, well, let's see how this unfolds. Anyone that tunes in knows I always like to hear about kind of what people's journeys were. So, Dallas, did you always want to be an author?
I think I always wanted to write in some form or another. I think whether it was I'm not sure if it was ever going to be like a book about film, but I did some sort of script writing for shows when I was just after I left university. I did film studies at uni for a couple of years and sort of wrote essays and stuff like that. And I think that's where my sort of love of film really sort of came together and sort of got a better understanding of the making of how to make a film and how to sort of analyse and view a film. And then sort of 2009, I think I sort of started blogging about movies and stuff like that, and then sort of got the odd sort of writing work for, whether it was just writing about a movie for another website or something like that. I did a week's work experience at Empire magazine in 2010, or no, early 2011 it would have been, which sort of really sort of, that's when I really got the bug and said that's something I really want to do with my life. It's not turned into a full-time paid career, but I do the odd bit here and there, and you know, it's more of a sort of a passion and a hobby rather than a job, but it's one that I enjoy. And yeah, the book sort of came about, the idea sort of came about so early 2015, I think it was. My wife Lucy, who wasn't my wife at the time, she was my girlfriend, she'd created a book for me because the aim was, I think I'd done in 2014, the aim was to try and do 200 film reviews on my blog, and what she'd done is she'd actually taken them all and sort of put them into a book, a sort of self-publishing thing on a website, and sort of seeing that sort of come back, it sort of gave me the idea that, oh, actually maybe, you know, I don't have to wait around for, you know, to pitch an idea, and just I could actually do it myself. And yeah, that's kind of where the idea sort of came from.
Were there any kind of writers and journalists that appealed to you and inspired you?
I mean, the obvious one is sort of Mark Kermode. Sort of really enjoyed his writing on film, and the fact that I met him at the Cameo, I can't remember what it was, actually probably would have been around about sort of 2009, I think, or 2010. He sort of released his first book, I think it was The Good, the Bad and the Multiplex, and I sort of chatted to him, sort of gave me the idea that, oh, actually, maybe I could do something like that. It's certainly a career I wanted to follow. The sort of Roger Ebert as well, sort of Pauline Kael, those were the sort of film writers that you were able to sort of, rather than just sort of look at their online reviews and stuff, they actually had compilation books and stuff of their film writing. So that was the kind of, those were the writers that I sort of followed and stuff like that. And yeah, sort of, yeah, I'd say, I mean, there's other sort of film writers, it's sort of online stuff, it's more sort of like Robbie Coln at the Telegraph, but I sort of found his work at the News of the World first, and then sort of like the sort of Helen O'Hara and stuff like that at Empire as well were always the ones that I followed, because not only was the writing good, but those were the writers that I would normally agree with what they would say as well. I mean, obviously, you know, sometimes you get someone who goes completely off, and, you know, you completely disagree with them, but the way they write a review can sometimes, you can appreciate their point of view even though you don't agree with it.
So for those that might not be familiar with this book, what is this book that you've written, and what was the genesis of this idea? This was the one that you followed through on.
Well, Exterior New York City, Discover the Real New York, On Location is maybe rather unsurprisingly a sort of travel guide / film history book on New York City. I first went to New York in 2009 for my 29th birthday, and immediately sort of fell in love with the city. I love the buzz of it. I've met some people there who are still friends sort of 10 years on, and it gave me this opportunity to have a sofa to crash on. So up until recently, I was there once a year for 10 years in a row, which obviously means I'm a big fan of New York City. And so it was just sort of walking around, it was kind of on my own. One of the days you sort of walk around and you realise that you're kind of recognising places, and you've got that sort of deja vu feeling, but you've never actually been there before, and it's just because you're recognising locations that you've seen in the movies and TV shows and stuff like that. And sort of wandering around, it was like, well, how do I find certain locations that I really want to find? And you do get some sort of in the back of travel guides and stuff like Your Lonely Planets and whatever. It'll have maybe like 3 or 4, but I wanted something a bit more comprehensive, not only for myself, but also for, I'm sure there'll be other people in the same boat as me who would want to know where these things were. So I decided to sort of, I think, the idea came into sort of late 2014, early 2015 when I went to New York for New Year's and proposed to my girlfriend, who happily accepted, and she's now my wife. And we went to this spot in Sutton Park Place where Manhattan was filmed, where they had the bench scene where they're looking out over the Queensboro Bridge. But of course, the fun fact is that there's no bench actually in that particular spot, and they just brought one with them. The wonders and the magic of cinema. So we had to sort of create a shot elsewhere, sort of further down in the park, but still, that's where I proposed, because it's one of our favourite films and one of mine. And yeah, it was a magical location, a great memory, and I wanted to sort of capture that sort of feeling and that magic and bring it to the book, I think.
So when you kind of had this idea to make the book, did you do like market research to see what other books you were maybe up against, or how you would potentially make this into something that would be more than just an idea, but kind of, make it, a reality, I guess?
Yeah, well, I mean, the book that Lucy had produced for me sort of introduced me to the site lulu.com. It sort of made it really easy to sort of put a book together in terms of the sort of formatting and stuff like that. So I knew that if I had an idea and I had essentially a book written down, then I would be able to self-publish it and do the marketing and all that myself. Obviously, the biggest issue is, and hurdle to go across is actually writing the thing. So market research there was a few books out there about New York and stuff like that, and in terms of locations and stuff, but a lot of them were sort of more sort of photo picture books that didn't really have a lot of information beyond the actual sort of film itself, and they maybe were only sort of discussing that one location of the film. So what I want to do is maybe do more of a sort of overview of filming in New York and stuff like that, and make it more than just a travel guide. It was also something, hopefully a book that people would enjoy reading about the sort of film history of New York. So obviously a lot of planning goes into something like this, because the biggest issue I knew I would have was, obviously you don't want it to be a text-based book. You want to have some photos in there so people can identify easily enough the locations. But obviously there's the issue of copyright, and I wanted to get around that by basically having my own photographs to be able to put into the book. So I think there was, what was it that summer? Oh yeah, Lucy was going to, I think she was going to some study course in London for a couple of weeks. So I figured I'd be on my own in Aberdeen, so I would have the opportunity and the time to go back over to New York and get some photos. And my parents kind of wanted to come along and help out. My dad's a keen photographer, so he agreed to be my official photographer for the project. And so we sort of I mapped out basically about 100 odd locations that I want to try and get and we went over for sort of 3 or 4 days, and each day did a different area of New York City, and we walked about the equivalent of 3 marathons in 3 days around the place. And my dad often wouldn't know what he was taking photos of. It was just basically like, just trust me, this is a building which featured in a film, so it was fine. And he would point and shoot, and then we'd get as much sort of coverage as we could, and then I would sort of came back and in sort of July and sort of finished off the writing of it. I'd picked out sort of my top 10 films in chronological order for the book, and then also wrote about general sort of things like, so it's a chapter on post-apocalyptic New York. So you've got like I'm Legend in there, which is becoming, quite relevant these days in terms of not many people walking around Times Square. And then you've got sort of the gangster films, you've got sort of the films of Woody Allen and sort of Spike Lee, Martin Scorsese and stuff like that, superheroes in New York. And then sort of towards the end it was sort of identifying famous hotels, bars, restaurants and stuff like that were also featured in. So that was sort of 2015. So I think some of the bars and restaurants are maybe shut down permanently or closed, so they're maybe out of date, but the rest of it I think is still probably pretty relevant.
Obviously, a lot of people have ambitions to write books, but you have gone and done it. What was your approach always going to be? Did you sort of consider, as you say, sort of the self-publishing option, Kickstarters, maybe pitching to some of the large organisations, or did you always want to sort of have it in your own hands how this book would be released and come out?
I mean, obviously, I think if I'd managed to get a publisher interested in it, then it would have probably done better. I've sold a reasonable amount of copies, but I don't think it was ever really about that. Obviously, if you got a multi-million-dollar publishing deal or something like that, it'd be very nice where they pay me to go around the world to different cities and write a book on film locations for each one. That'd be a lovely lifestyle to have. Obviously not in the current climate, but before then. But I think it was just something that I wanted to do just to see if I could do it. I think I'm not really sure. Kickstarter probably wasn't really as big as it was back then. I think it was sort of being used for, filmmakers and stuff were doing it to do films. I don't think I never seriously considered the idea of basically getting people to pay for my flights to go to New York for 5 days to write the book. But I think if I was to do something similar in the future, I might consider that, because I think just sort of publishing copies and then sort of giving people a copy as part of their Kickstarter reward or something could be a way to do it, I think, because it is a kind of a lot of effort, because I think because you're self-publishing as well, sort of the deadlines and everything is all on you. I kind of set myself a deadline of, I'll start writing it in sort of February, and I'll aim to do a sort of chapter a month, and then get the photos done, get it all sort of formatted, edited, and then hopefully published around about October time. I don't know why I'd set that date. It was an arbitrary date, but I managed to stick to it, and was really pleased with the final effort. It went through a couple of sort of drafts and stuff. Lucy was kind enough to edit it for me and things like that. So, but I mean, I think if I'd wanted to do something like that again, I think it would be nice to have sort of someone sort of pushing you just to get you over the finish line and stuff like that, to be able to work to a deadline. Because I mean, they say that during lockdown you've got a lot more time, but I find myself almost being slightly less creative, which is annoying, and maybe I do need another project to get the old juices flowing and get back into it. So I've got a couple of ideas sort of floating around the head, so we'll see what comes out of it. But at the moment, I'm kind of like Jack Torrance in The Shining, just sort of sitting there looking at a typewriter.
Was there an element where you picked out like sort of like 100 films and then kind of you broke it down? Was it always kind of things thinking like, what would people want to see? Or was there an element of like, well, this is something I think I know me and maybe a few other people would be interested in? Or was it always maybe trying to appeal to the people that always kind of go, oh, I'd love to see the Ghostbusters kind of stop, or the Manhattan locations from, say, the Woody Allen film?
I think it's always a difficult one of knowing who to pitch to, because you'd have your sort of hardcore film fans, and then you've got your sort of more sort of general sort of travel fans who might be sort of interested in it. It's trying to find that middle ground, that tightrope to walk along, that it would appeal to hopefully as many people as possible, but then, the people enjoy it as well, or don't feel alienated by what they're reading about. So, I mean, in terms of like the films that I picked, the sort of big ones. So you've got your Ghostbusters, you've got your When Harry Met Sally's, your Cat's Delis, your Spider-Man's, Wall Street and stuff like that. But then I've also gone with ones personally which I really like The Sweet Smell of Success. It's a fantastic film from 1957, and then The Naked City, which was the first film really to be sort of filmed on location in New York in 1948. Before that, it was everything was normally sort of filmed in Hollywood, and you would have had sort of sets recreating stuff in the Hollywood studios and just getting a few establishing shots and stuff like that. But once the sort of New York opened itself up to filming, then basically there's no substituting for that, I think.
You mentioned, so obviously these are going to be films. Was there ever kind of a thought of like mixing, say, film and TV locations as well? I know I'm in the middle of watching Billions, and every time they go to like an amazing restaurant or spot, I think, oh, I'd love to visit that. Was it always going to be film, or was there an element of thinking, hey, I might put in where the Friends location is for their apartment, or the Tom's restaurant from Seinfeld?
I've been to the Friends building a couple of times now. Yeah, I think just because by just going through, just from my own memory, a list of films in New York that I wanted to kind of look at, I was already at about 100. And I thought if you include TV as well, then that opens yourself up to so many other locations. And I think I just wanted to focus on one element because there was so much rich history of the film as well. I mean, you could do a completely separate one to do TV, and I think it would have been too big a project, and I think it would have ended up becoming a massive volume, whereas I wanted something which was you could dive sort of straight into and wouldn't maybe feel so daunting. I do have some sort of ones which are about sort of 300-400 pages long, and I thought that was too much, and I don't know if I'd ever finished it, because there's always new locations sort of popping up. Well, not maybe new locations, but new films and TV shows which are visiting locations which could end up being featured in it. So you'd end up doing volume 2, volume 3, volume 4.
Was there ever a location you thought, I'd love to kind of put this up on this New York film, and then it turned out to be actually it was some sort of set in Los Angeles, it was just kind of fake New York? Did anything ever catch you by surprise in your sort of research?
Well, I mean, that's the funny thing about Friends is it's basically all filmed in LA. There's just the establishing shots of those buildings and stuff like that. It's like the park where they're all dancing in the opening credits and stuff is actually a park in LA. It's not near Central Park. And the thing is, it's called Central Park, that cafe, but it's actually, I'm assuming, based in Greenwich Village, where the building is. So, geographically wise, it's not maybe the most accurate film. Everyone talks about going uptown and stuff like that, but it's actually quite a long way to go uptown in New York. You don't just go past the park on a walk from Central Park and then end up back down there. This was somewhere that they always ended up going, on lunch and stuff like that. So they all seem to work, because Chandler also works very close to Central Park. So yeah, he would have been, and Bloomingdale's is also it's very far away from Greenwich Village. It's a good sort of 20-25 minutes on the subway. Not the tube, the subway. So yeah, but I don't think I was ever really sort of disappointed. I mean, the actual sort of look of some of the places is kind of maybe like, oh, it's maybe not as appealing as it looks with the lighting and the Hollywood glamour. But I don't think I was ever disappointed by not being able to find somewhere. I don't think.
What kind of practicalities did you have to take into account? Obviously, you had a limited amount of time that you could go to New York to take all the photos. Were elements like the weather, on one level kind of had to be taken into account for heading over? Or was there also elements like, right, I'm going to have 100 pages, 100 films, but I've only got so much kind of paper that I can use. I've got a certain amount of budget. How did you sort of draw up what was essential and what needed to be taken into account to produce the book?
Well, time-wise, we went in the 4th of July weekend. So I had a pretty good idea that the weather would be okay. Thankfully it was every single day. Really, a lot of it came down to sort of a lot of time spent in advance, sort of mapping out everything, because you see these locations on the films, but then it was really sort of having to knuckle down and use the internet to find out where some of these locations were, and then working out the easiest and quickest route around everything, so you're maximizing the amount of time you spent, because we probably spent about 8 or 9 hours each day sort of walking around the city and stuff. Obviously you need to take breaks and stuff like that, but sometimes you'd be at locations such as bars and restaurants which featured in movies, so you could sort of kill two birds with one stone with that. Sometimes you would feel really awkward because some of the locations were sort of buildings which were people's homes, so you maybe sort of try and get a quick snap, and you didn't want to sort of bother anyone whose house it was, and stuff like that. But I didn't really encounter too many problems with it. Like the weather was good, and we were in good health, and the feet didn't hurt too bad at the end of each day. There wasn't any sort of locations that we missed or couldn't get. Probably one disappointment would have been the Chelsea Hotel, which was completely covered in scaffolding, and still was actually, even sort of 10 years later. It's been going through a major renovation. I was lucky enough to get the Ghostbusters Firehouse before it got renovated recently, and I know after I published the book, a few friends had been over, and they were greeted by the fact that you could kind of see in the sort of doorway, but the rest of it was kind of already sort of boarded up and covered in scaffolding, so you couldn't get the magical money shot that many people would have wanted.
So what were kind of the personal highlights of the trip? It sounds like obviously you and your father had quite an adventure, lots of walking, lots of locations. What were some of your kind of favourite memories of going over there and putting this book together?
I mean, it was nice to have to sort of spend that time with my dad. He sort of recently retired from being a doctor for over 30 years, so I think he was in that sort of stage where he was sort of actively looking for a project to keep him busy, but he really sort of enjoyed it and got to see a sort of side of New York which he hadn't done before. He'd been over, I think, once before by that point, but when you go over for the sort of the first time, it's you're sort of heading around most of the sort of tourist sites, your Times Squares, your sort of World Trade Center memorial sites, Central Park and all that sort of stuff. So it was sort of going a bit more off the beaten track, and getting those. For me, one of the highlights probably would have been got to go to Coney Island for the first time. I'd always sort of been over sort of March or sort of like October, December time, when the amusement park and stuff is closed. So it was great to go on the sort of roller coasters and stuff like that. Have a back when I wasn't vegan, I had the sort of the Coney Island hot dogs and stuff like that. So that was good. And yeah, no, it was just I just love the city. So it was just sort of being able to spend sort of all that time just sort of walking around, and that's the best way, I think, is to see New York is just to actually walk around, not spending all that time on the subway or in a taxi. If you're going up and down the city, it's always walking. If you're going across, you definitely walk, because you're sort of traveling left to right in New York City. It's by cab and whatever just takes far too long. So yeah, it was just being able to see it, I think.
Did you manage to make it to the October deadline you had given yourself, or did it kind of go on a bit longer?
No, I did actually. Yeah, I think I managed to get it pretty much all written up by August, and then sort of sent it to my editor, my wife, to proofread and stuff like that, and then managed to get all the photos edited and stuff like that, and then sort of got them back sort of early October, and then had a sort of launch event at the Belmont Cinema where I was working at the time. So yeah, I managed to stick to my own deadline, which was good. I didn't have to push it back.
What's it like when it comes to kind of publishing the book? Is there a kind of nerve and excitement of this is something that's been, as you said, like a kind of passion project? Now it's kind of going out there, you're going to maybe get reviews, reaction. Are people going to buy it? Are people going to turn up to your launch event? What kind of goes through your head when it sort of like maybe becomes a bit more real when it's in your hand?
I think the moment it became real was when because I was a local author and I had connections at Waterstones, the Aberdeen branch, I managed to get it in there. So sort of seeing it on a bookshelf was pretty cool. it kind of felt real at that point. And yeah, no, the launch event went well. I sold about 20 copies, not all entirely to friends and family, and they're all obviously very complimentary about it. But I've had some good reviews. Some people have. Had photos from people who I know who took it over and sort of snapped it in front of places. I actually went back. I think it was the February after I'd published it with Lucy, and we got to walk around and sort of take some photos with the book outside some of the locations as well, which was kind of cool. But yeah, no, it kind of felt real, and yeah, sort of seeing some sales copies and sort of selling out at Waterson's and stuff like that was a pretty cool feeling, actually. Yeah.
Was it always what you kind of hoped being a published author would be like, or was there anything that caught you by surprise?
I mean, it was just a modest success. You always kind of hope that maybe it'll take off and you're selling hundreds of thousands of copies. But I think with something which is a very sort of niche topic, and it kind of falls between a film book and a travel book, so it's quite. I mean, that's the thing that I found is that when you don't have a marketing budget behind a book being launched, it can be quite difficult to get it out there and stuff like that. So when you've got a small sort of Twitter following, it's never going to reach, the masses. But if you can just reach a few people and they say they enjoy the book, then that's something. So I think you kind of get a big appreciation for the amount of money and work that needs to go into marketing something like that. So yeah.
With the kind of this book, has there always been things of like wanting to do a sequel? There's New York is probably one of the most filmed locations in the world. There's new films every year, new shows being made kind of in New York. Have you ever kind of thought about making a sequel or companion book based in New York?
I'm not sure if I'd do a sequel or whatever, but because some of the sort of locations, such as restaurants and the famous F.O. Schwartz, where Tom Hanks played the big piano, that sort of closed down and they ended up moving location. It's always been in the back of my head that I should probably update it at some point to maybe make it a bit more sort of up to date and relevant again. There's a couple of sort of cinemas which have sadly closed down, so they could be replaced. There's a few places that I'd love to go, and yeah, I mean the most recent sort of big film that was in there was that I did an entire chapter on was Spider-Man 2002. But I think the most recent film that I had at that point in 2015 was probably John Wick. So like you say, I mean, there's been hundreds of films set in New York that have come out since that would be worthy of a mention in that. So it's always been in the back of my mind to maybe not do a volume 2, but do an updated version, I think, and sort of get a few more new locations in there and sort of tidy it up a bit. Now, knowing now what is needed involved into that I think, because I think it'd be fairly easy to do. Again, it wouldn't take long to update it, but of course, any excuse to go back to New York. Obviously, it might be next year before I can do that again, but I really want to get back to New York. I've just been, sort of seeing everything that's happening over there just gives me an appreciation to go back and get back in my favourite city again. And, just with sort of watching movies at home and stuff like that, there's quite a few of them on Netflix that have been set in New York, and you're just like, oh, I want to go back. Even though I know Japan should be the priority because I missed out on that this year. But
with that, is there any other kind of places you would like to shoot? Chicago, for example, is becoming a place that's being shot more and more for films. Edinburgh itself seems to be becoming a growing market for it as well. Is there other places you would like to make maybe companion books or add to the series with?
I mean, Scotland, Edinburgh and Glasgow in particular has been one in the back of my mind which I would love to do ever since Avengers came over for Infinity War. It was like, okay, I think this could work. I think there is a couple of books out there, but I think I could do something slightly different and a bit more in-depth with them. But I think the one that sort of came out was more of a sort of tourist board sort of version of it. I think they're saying, look at how great Scotland is and all the different places that you can go to, but I think it didn't mention Under the Skin, so therefore it's invalid for me. So I think I would want to do that, especially with sort of Fast and Furious 9 sort of being filmed recently. I think the scope to do certainly half of 2/3 of the book sort of set in Edinburgh, Glasgow, but then you'd sort of go out to the sort of Highlands and Islands and stuff like that as well for sort of Prometheus, Wicker Man, James Bond, sort of Skyfall, stuff like that. Because I think that's one location that you've been to, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I've gone there several times. It's such a beautiful spot. If people were kind of listening to this and were like, oh, I really want to get my hands on a copy of this as an ebook or a hard copy, where can kind of people find this book, Dallas?
Well, they can find it on Amazon. .com or .co.uk easily enough. If you just type in Dallas King in New York City, it'll pop up, and it's available on paperback, and it's also available on ebook as well. And so ebooks means that you can just download it and have it on your phone, and you won't have to use data charges when you're in New York or Wi-Fi in order to open it up and figure it out. Because actually, that's one thing I would say to people, is one thing I didn't realize with ebooks is I was editing it for an ebook and sort of resizing things and whatever to make it look nice on the page, but then found out that basically an ebook will resize it depending on the size of the screen that you're looking at. So I basically wasted about 2-3 days trying to edit it for no reason whatsoever, it turned out. So that's a fun fact. Basically, don't worry about editing your ebook. It will just auto format to whatever screen you're going to put it on.
So is there anything that we've not touched upon today that you think, oh, I would love to kind of pass on this sort of, experience that I had, or some sort of insight into the publishing world?
I think one other thing is I did Lulu, but I think I would if I went back, if I was to redo it again, I would probably just sort of publish through Amazon, their sort of digital online self-publishing thing, because I think the reach would be better. I think it would sort of appear higher up on their sort of search engines and stuff like that. Also, maybe I think the title was maybe too long. I think you would need to have something about sort of film location in the title. I've learned sort of about data metrics and stuff like that. So there's a way probably of sort of titling your book so it's going to appear higher up on search engines and stuff like that. Find someone with someone who does good graphic design, if it's either for like a cover image or certainly the mapping. I mean, I did it myself using sort of free software and stuff like that, but it's something that I'd probably look to invest a bit of money in next time in order to make it look as good as possible. I mean, with something like this, you're never going to get it as up to date as you want, because by the time you go through the publishing process, there's going to be something new and fancy that you want to get. Because I think the first time I went out and had the idea, I was around about Times Square, but sort of didn't do anything. And then I came back and Birdman came out, and I went, oh, look at those locations. Oh, I should have got that. So I was able to get photos when we went out in July. But yeah, you're going to be kicking yourself. As soon as the book's sort of completed, you're going to be thinking, oh, I really wish I'd put that in, or I should change that. But I think anyone, if you manage to actually self-publish a book, I think it's a huge achievement. You should be very proud of what you've done, and don't take it too hard. I mean, thankfully I've got no 1-star rotten reviews or stuff like that, but I really enjoyed the process and would really like to do something like that again. I mean, sort of film locations are one of my passions. I did have a few lined up obviously for Japan, but I mean, like you say, Chicago would be great to get to, and I've never managed to get to the West Coast, so sort of LA, San Francisco. But I think maybe it's the kind of thing that you'd probably want also to have like a website or something. I'd always dreamed of like an app, turning it into an app so you could sort of bring up, where you are, and it would highlight locations around you and stuff like that. But that's something I'd need to team up with someone, because I just don't have the technical know-how on how to do that, I think.
Any more of lockdown, you become an app developer in your own time, Dallas. So, look on the silver lining.
Oh, I'm too busy into creating board games related to movies at the moment.
So, Dallas, obviously that was your first time in the interview chair. Did you enjoy the experience? How did you find talking about yourself?
I find it less stressful than I thought it was going to be. You didn't hit me with the hard questions about how they've handled the coronavirus in New York and stuff like that. So.
Yes, I saved that for my other podcast hosted by CNN, the Lee Hutchison Hour or something along those lines.
Absolutely.
So obviously we can't just recommend your book today. we always do this on the show each week. What would be your kind of weekly recommendation for people to check out while they're in lockdown?
Well, I know I should pick something related to New York, but I've actually been really enjoying The Last Dance on Netflix at the moment, which, as a Knicks fan, is a terrible thing to say. But it's the documentary looking at the 98 season of the Chicago Bulls, trying to go for their sixth championship. And it's sort of a great look. They had like all behind the scenes access at the final season. It was sort of hinted that, you know, sort of Phil Jackson, the head coach, and Michael Jordan, it was going to be their last season. They'd won 3 in a row. Jordan had gone into baseball for some reason for 2 seasons and they'd come back and they'd won 2, and they were looking to sort of win their 6th, going for a second three-peat. And it's a sort of fascinating sort of series looking back, really sort of in-depth, sort of got interviews with all the sort of players, Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman and stuff like that. I love that. That was the sort of time when I was really into basketball, was sort of 92 to sort of around about 2000. Basically, I think while I was living at home and they had it on Sky, and yeah, sort of really fascinating, sort of no holds barred. It's not afraid to get sort of down and dirty with the sort of the motives of the players and stuff like that. And yeah, I can highly recommend that. It's sort of coming out 2 episodes a week. The first 4 are online at the moment, and then a sort of 10 episode series. So yeah, highly recommend that. What about yourself?
I'm going to have to recommend a podcast called Primitive Culture. So it's hosted on the Trek FM network, and it's a fantastic show that dives into Star Trek in a way that I absolutely adore, where it kind of looks at Star Trek through the prism of culture, history, and I find that an incredibly interesting way to kind of discuss one of the kind of the best franchises out there. So it's hosted by Tony Black and Duncan Barrett, who are, you know, they've been guests on the show in the past, so it's a kind of weekly fortnightly show where it kind of picks a topic and it'll dive in, and I've really enjoyed one of their most recent episodes, sort of looking at the cultural references within the first season of Star Trek Picard. It was so bumper. I listened to it over 3 days of different kind of self-isolation, you know, 1 walk a day kind of trips. So yeah, I've really enjoyed that. So it's been really well worth checking out. So you can find that on Apple Podcasts or anywhere that you get your podcast fix from.
Yeah, no, I really need to get into more sort of listening to podcasts and stuff like that, because my wife and I, we go for our walks together, but because, you know, we're both sort of working from home, it's like you can't really have music on and stuff like that, so podcasts are sort of perfect for sort of going along with some work and stuff like that. So yeah, no, I'll definitely have to give that one a whirl and open myself up to a bit more Star Trek knowledge, I think.
Thank you very much to everyone for tuning in today. This was a lot of fun. Hopefully you all stay safe and well out there in lockdown, and we'll speak with you again soon. Take care.